did talk to Hayden.
Hello everyone. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Kevin Cleary from Children's National Medical Center in Washington, D.C. I've been asked to do a very short introduction.
Sure.
Background is in mechanical engineering. Before working on children's rehab, he worked in NASA, in the Department of Defense, in National Department of Defense, and also in adult rehabilitation. And he currently works in children's rehabilitation. And today he's going to give us one of the research strands.
Thanks, Bioeng. Yeah, it's great to be here in Toronto. I was in Denver until Sunday, and the big winter was coming. I got a message from United, so I took an earlier flight out to come to the warmer weather of Toronto. And, if you have to stay here, I recommend the Hilton and have them upgrade you to the executive floor, where from the 32nd floor you can look out over the city. So it was a very, very nice morning. And I even did my workout in swimming too as well, so it's a great day. Anyway, I had met Bioeng this summer at the big Rehab conference, Rehab Week in Toronto, which was a great week here too as well. And I had wanted to come here and visit too, and I unfortunately only made it to the Children's Hospital that day, so I'm glad to be here. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're doing at Children's National. We are in the nation's capital. We won't get into politics today. That's very divisive, and I understand that I'm being recorded as well as broadcast, so I'll try to keep it clean right here. But anyway, we'll interspace a few personal remarks during the conversation to keep it interesting. So I'm going to go ahead, let's see, slide down. Maybe I have to click. Okay. Dan, if I press the down arrow, it should advance?
Spacebar.
Spacebar. Okay, thanks. Okay, okay. Yep. Okay. Okay. Let's see. Okay. Well, it didn't take long for technical difficulties. Okay. No. Oh, maybe I have to click on those arrows. Yeah. Okay, got it. Okay, great. Okay, we got it. So I'm going to give a little overview of our institute as well. Talk a little bit about robotics, and we probably won't have time to talk too much about the other topics, the navigation and image guidance and the image processing, but I'm always happy to talk after with people as well. Okay, let's go next. So we are again in we say the nation's capital, at least for the U.S. people as well. So we're a pretty large hospital. We basically serve the Baltimore, Washington area. We joke there's a small hospital in Baltimore called Hopkins. But they don't have a standalone children's hospital. So we are the typical model where we have a big hospital downtown and we have outpatient centers around the region, 300 beds, a lot of ICUs, and then a three-part mission with research, care, and education. We actually get our academic appointments through George Washington University, but we're a wholly owned subsidiary. I was actually working at the adult hospital, Georgetown University, not to be confused with George Washington, and I saw this headline about 10 years ago, which you can see, Abu Dhabi gives U.S. hospital 150 million, and at that time I didn't even know how to pronounce Abu Dhabi. You know, but anyway, I said that's a lot of money, and I had been at the adult hospital for 13 years. Maybe I should go to the children's hospital and see about building devices for kids. So I was able to come over and help set up this engineering institute that we have physically located in the hospital. And when they set up this institute, they had 4 drivers, and they had a mantra, which was pediatric care should be more precise, non-invasive, and pain-free. Okay, so we certainly know nowadays we want medicine to be more precise, you know, precision medicine initiative. We want it to be non-invasive. We don't want to slice people wide open. Pain-free as well is a worthy goal. And they had 4 pillars: the pain medicine, immunology, bioengineering, and personalized medicine. But the 3 in black, the pain medicine, immunology, and personalized medicine, were biology-based, and they were already within the hospital. They just expanded what they were doing. What was unique with bioengineering was the first time they had brought engineers and scientists in the hospital to work with clinicians. And I think that's going to become a hallmark of modern medicine. You know, medicine is becoming more and more dependent upon technology, particularly as we want to do things in less invasive and more precise manner, and more quantitative as well. You know, we know the art of medicine is great, and clinical people, you know, train for a long time and are very good at what they do. But sometimes you wonder how much science is it versus art. And I think our role is to bring more science to medicine to enable better patient treatments. So, okay, so we got some nice research space on the top of the hospital. This is all our research space. It was the last remaining shell space on the 6th floor of the hospital. So physically being in the hospital is quite nice. And we had several clinical people actually move their offices up to our rehab, not our rehab institute, to our institute, which is really more of an engineering institute. Rehab is a smaller part of what we do. And so that's really been key, is that we do have daily contact with the clinical world. And I think that's important in medicine too as well, particularly for engineers and scientists who aren't trained in medicine. You really need to understand the clinical world to see how the developments that you can bring can impact medicine. So that's really important to do. Okay, the vision of the bioengineering initiative when they set it up was threefold. One is an international leader in technology development, clinical translation, and product commercialization for pediatric surgery. So it really was a surgery institute and set up by the surgeons, but we do work with all the departments across the hospital. But the goal was also to try to commercialize things. Everybody, of course, has an innovation institute nowadays. I'm sure you guys do as well, in tech transfer. And sometimes, let's see, is tech transfer here before I say this? Okay, it's going to be recorded so they can listen later. I think it's great, and you should think that way from the beginning, but I think it's sometimes people are over-optimistic about how easy it is to commercialize something, and maybe over-optimistic about, about markets. But, if you don't look that way, if you never commercialize anything, then your impact is limited. So I do think product commercialization, and if you haven't ever taken any of these commercialization courses in the US, they have something called I-Core. I don't know if it comes to Canada, but I'm sure they have various ways of interviewing stakeholders, and we'll talk a little bit about that later in the lecture too, what a minimal viable product is. And then next was to enable the next generation of minimally invasive procedures, which are really dependent upon technology. So when they do things in a more minimally invasive manner, the physician does not have open access as they did in the old days. So they are really dependent upon technology. So this can be imaging, robotics, navigation, augmented reality, theranostics is a combination of therapy and diagnostics. And then we also are a resource for the hospital to provide technology solutions to clinical problems. So now that I've been there almost 10 years, people come up to me almost every week, and a clinician will have an idea. And of course, I never say that's a bad idea. Remember, there are no bad questions for later on too. That's and I just said, that's interesting. Why don't you send me an email? And then about half of them follow up because they're very busy. Oh, that's interesting. Why don't you come talk to our research group? And half of them follow up. So we do want to be clinically based, but we also have to kind of ferret out the people who really are serious and really want to work on their problems as well. And that's how we work with our clinical colleagues. We always support their ideas, but we kind of have a funneling process to see who's really a serious collaborator, and then those are the collaborators that we try to work with. Okay, so that's a little background on our institute right here. And let's go to the next part about medical robotics. So my background actually is in robotics. I actually got my PhD from University of Texas in 1990, and I did my postdoc in Japan. That was the first year National Science Foundation had postdocs in Japan. At that time, they were very concerned about Japanese and semiconductors, but also robotics was a big thing as well. So today we're going to focus a little bit on MRI compatible robotics. Why would you want to use robots in a magnet? Of course, the main feature will be rehab robotics. I think that will be of the most interest to your institute. And the other topics, robotics for hip pinning, Da Vinci research kit, Star Robot automated suturing is something I can talk to offline. Okay, so first question, how many people here are students today? Then? Okay, that's not too bad. Okay, how about MDs? Do we have any MDs here? Oh, good. I can freely comment about MDs in the clinical world. Okay. All right. Always good to know. But it will be recorded, so today, again, we'll keep it relatively clean. Okay. So let's go on. So why robotics? Why would you want to use a robot in surgery and intervention, or even rehab for that matter? One is certainly make the procedure more precise. So robotics gives you quantitative data. It can provide additional dexterity. For those who have seen the Da Vinci robot, which is what we call the master-slave robot, mostly started for prostatectomies in adults, but we actually do use some in the pediatric. The Da Vinci has an extra roll at the wrist, and that gives us an additional dexterity versus what a human can do. It can be more ergonomic. Certainly, again, both from the surgery and the rehab point of view, if you're trying to manipulate the anatomy, it can be very taxing on the individual as well. So I think robotics can play a role. In the clinical world, it can reduce and eliminate exposure to X-rays. So if you're doing procedures where you require X-ray imaging or C-arm imaging as we require, a robot could reduce that for you. For us, we're going to talk about how you can enable procedures with an MRI. and then also telesurgery. I mean, there's certainly a lot of literature about that in the early days. Actually, I know in Canada, there was a fellow named Anvari, who I think is now down in Hamilton as well, who had done that in Canada. And in the US, one of the issues is that we license by state. You know, as I'm sure you probably know, we don't have universal health care in the US, and I don't see it coming, unfortunately, right here. But in Canada, of course, you know, it's universal health care, and you can be treated by a physician anywhere within Canada. And finally, a digital hub for information. You can imagine in the future that we will have a surgical cockpit, and the robot can be a digital hub for information where you can bring up other cases. And you know, when we eventually make use of everything you read now about machine intelligence and statistical, you know, shape models and various other computational models, that could all be fed into this, you know, information system, and the robot could be the digital hub. Okay, so first quiz question for today. Okay, how many robots do we have at Children's National? And I'll give away the answer here. Last count there was 6. Here we have the Da Vinci master-slave robot, both the clinical and the trainer. We have the KUKA lightweight robots, so anybody who worked in research lab, KUKA has a line of robots that are about the same dexterity as the human hand, that also have torque sensing at each joint and are designed to interact with humans. So the bonus, any Germans here today? KUKA factories there, so the bonus, I've heard KUKAI, KUKA, I don't know the plural. And then Siemens Ego, so something called cone beam CT, where you can take a C-arm, you can rotate it, and you can get tomographic-like imaging. So that's what okay. All right, on to the next topic. So here we're going to talk about MRI-compatible robotics, the rationale. So first of all, I didn't know this, but when I went to the pediatric hospital, I found out, and maybe the same is true at Sick Kids across the street, we do more MRIs than CTs because we're very sensitive to radiation dose in kids, particularly young kids right here. But we don't typically do procedures in the magnet. So procedures are typically still done under X-ray imaging or CT imaging. One is a closed bore MRI makes it difficult to access the anatomy. And robotics can help with access and guidance. So here we have the typical closed bore MRI. All right, so how many people have been in an MRI then? Okay, yeah, so if you get a little claustrophobic looking up at the screen, maybe they give you something to view. But here we have our clinician trying to reach into the center of a closed bore MRI to manipulate a needle or other instrument. And I tell him the real problem is that his arm is too short. Okay, right here, he says, no, you know, you need to help me. So we built some body mount robots on a rapid prototyping machine that can actually sit and work in the MR environment. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Okay, so here's arthrography right here. So arthrography is injection of a needle into a joint where maybe there's some problems. In the US, particularly kids who throw the curveball too early tend to throw out their shoulder. They come in, we put a needle in under X-ray, so step 1 fluoroscopy, and we inject contrast, and then we get the next MR slot. And usually it works pretty well, but if MR is delayed that day or some other scheduling issues, maybe it washes out, we don't get a new image. So what we'd like to do is change this two-step procedure to a one-step procedure all within the magnet. So here's a little body mount robot. This has, for the robotics people, has 4 degrees of freedom. It can, let's see, does the pointer show up there? I guess let's try the laser pointer right here. Okay, maybe, this is a translational degree of freedom here, along here, and then this whole thing rotates. So you just need to put it on the shoulder with the circle over the point of interest, and then the needle has something we call remote center of motion, so it can orient the needle about any axis right here. You can have some metal in a magnet, it just can't be ferromagnetic in that if you put a permanent magnet up to it, it won't stick. It will cause artifact, but if you keep it a distance away from the imaging of interest, you can manage it. So this device here is enabled to manipulate a needle within the magnet. We needed to get approval from our institutional review board or ethics board. They usually ask for an FDA determination, you know, in the US, so we go to the FDA and say, this is really a needle guide. This is not physically going to drive the needle. And I was actually surprised. The letter is a little hard to read, but it actually says that we agree this is what we call non-significant risk from a device perspective. So we got approved towards a clinical trial, and hopefully that will start next year, so I'll be able to come back at some point and update you. So that was one reason for MRI robotics. The other reason is something called long bone biopsy in kids. So these are the long bones, the arm, the leg. Sometimes kids come in and walk with a limp, and we want to get a tissue sample immediately to get a diagnosis to see whether it's something we call osteomyelitis, which is an infection, or osteosarcoma, which is a cancer, so they can plan treatment. So sometimes they can do it under CT, but if you look at the image on the right, the CT image doesn't really give a lot of discrimination of the bony anatomy there. And on the left, the MR right here, because there's some disease process there, gives a lot more. So the idea is we want to do these biopsies under MRI. So my colleague, Dan Stojanovici at Hopkins Urology Robotics, built this robotic device, which here looks a little bit like a gun right here, and it holds the needle. We also anchor the leg to the table. So before we put the robot on the body, so if there was motion, there would be no motion between the robot and the anatomy. Here we strap the anatomy down so it doesn't move. Interesting thing about this robot, this uses pneumatic stepper motors, and it uses optoelectronics, optical encoding, so it has no interference from electromagnetic sources like an MRI. So it presents no artifact. So some people will say this is really the way to build a truly MR-compatible robot. So we built this. We actually did a study with this device of positioning here. Instead of a needle, we call a trocar, a bone biopsy needle, which is a big thing that they literally drive in here. Oops, let's use the pointer. They literally drive in here with a hammer, right here, a little hammer, tap, 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 and get a bone sample. But this is it. So that's our foray into MR robotics as well. And we think what the robot can enable is the ability to manipulate instruments in a closed bore magnet where the physician can't. So a physician may eventually joystick control these devices to do procedures inside a magnet with imaging. All right, let's switch to the topic which I think is really of interest to you, being at a rehab institute, and talk about rehab robotics. First, my disclaimer is I have no background in rehab. I'm not a card-carrying rehab person, so for the last 5 years I've kind of dabbled with our physical medicine and rehab department. But we do work actively with our physical therapists, who again are in the same building with us, and the trials are actually done in our labs as well. So, you know, as I'm sure you guys will agree, we do think that robotics has a great potential for augmenting rehabilitation, that it's hopefully an emerging field, growing market, maybe slowly. For us, it's at least easier to initiate clinical trials in rehab than in surgery. You know, in surgery, we're actually cutting and putting things within. It's a little bit easier to get clinical trials. And we had a lot of interest from our physical medicine and rehab colleagues. So we've worked with ankle rehabilitation, which is going to be the main topic I'm going to talk about today for children with cerebral palsy. And then at the end, I'll show a little bit about a little therapeutic horseback riding simulator that we built for the lab as well. So let's go ahead. You know, we kind of joke when you're putting together a business plan, you can almost always find a market document on the web that shows always an upward growing growth curve. But you know, I think the rehab market is a little bit fragmented. I think there was some consolidation that I saw at the show here in Toronto as well, with the two big players, Hokema and the one out of Netherlands, I think, had merged as well. But overall, I think it's not like medical imaging when you see Siemens, GE, Philips, and you know, there's not quite as much critical mass yet. So I think the field is wide open. In our case, in pediatrics, the idea is that we do see a lot of kids with cerebral palsy. And cerebral palsy is an injury to the brain that's typically occurs at birth, although maybe not diagnosed till a little later. It is a lifelong injury as well. So these are kids who we feel always need to either have rehab or exercise their ankle so that they can walk and they can get around better and keep up with their peers. And it's fairly high magnitude as well. So I think if you look at the numbers as well, and then the lifetime cost for care, it is a large clinical problem. So again, some of the background here from my clinical colleagues. Decreased motor control can be, you know, either one side or bilateral right here, weakness, muscle imbalance, and difficulties walking. So I'll talk a little bit about some of the issues with gait. We actually do not have a gait lab where we are now. We are aiming to get a gait lab as well. Then they say that many gait abnormalities may be driven by the foot position during the gait cycle. So a little bit more on the background here. Okay, so there's something called constraint of increased therapy here too as well. This also relies upon repetition, where you need to do a lot of something, in order to do it. And this is where we think robotics could play a role, because particularly if we can move to the home, kids can do this at home so they don't have to come to the hospital, as well as they can do this with the device as well, where the therapist can only check the results. They don't always have to have a therapist there. So we started a couple years back with a little device that we had, and this young lady here, and I always say photos are used by permission of the patient. We always have to get media release so we can show these pictures. And this is the young lady in the chair here in the robotic device, which is similar to a Stewart platform. For those who don't know, it's a 6 degree of freedom device here that can move the foot. And this is the therapist looking on. And I think the main thing about the picture is the patient is quite bored here, because here we're manipulating the foot for her. And we said, well, maybe we have to do something to make it more interesting. So we developed a solution, and we're not the only people to have done this. There have been other ankle robots around, by other research groups here, with a robotic platform. So a 3 degree of freedom platform, basically about 3 intersecting axes, and video game technology, and move to a home version is our long-term goal. So here is to the left, we have one of our younger patients, and to the right, she was a teenager here. So their foot is in the device here. They're the pilot for an airplane video game, and I'll have a few videos later on. Will they show online, Dan, too, hopefully?
Should, yeah.
We should? Okay, good. Okay, great. Okay. All right. So we're kind of walk through this here, which is really developed by my colleagues. So one of my engineers, our physical therapist, and our former head of physical medicine and rehab, and I say that because Dr. Evans recently moved to the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, known as CHOP in our U.S. terminology, but she's still a collaborator. So we'd like to walk you through a little bit of the development of this system here, where we've gone through 3 iterations: the original device that we showed you, the new device that we sometimes call in the middle PEDBot Lab, and PEDBot Home. And PEDBot is a robot for the foot, not necessarily just for pediatrics, but remember, PED is also, I think the Latin abbreviation for foot, like in pedicure or something like that. So I'll walk you guys through a little bit of this, and you can maybe think about that as you develop your devices. This is going to be shown at this rehab conference in November 3rd to the 8th that my colleagues are going to go to. So I borrowed a lot of these slides from them. Okay. So again, if you look in the literature, rehab robotics can provide controlled, intensive task-specific training, very goal-directed, hopefully cognitively engaging for the patients. There's been multiple successful studies on rehab for adults with after stroke here, and significant gains shown, and many studies on success in the pediatric population. But it's kind of funny. We always joke, as in many medical studies, the major conclusion is more study is warranted. Right here. It's always a good thing to end your medical articles, we joke with right here. So more study is warranted. Same thing in pediatric rehab robotics. There was a kind of review of a number of studies on robotic assisted therapy on ankle rehabilitation. And again, the major conclusion was that more work is needed right here. So I think the field is wide open, and a lot of the studies are very small, and certainly none of these devices are in standard clinical practice. But if you look at the literature, the robots are coming, as well too. I mean, there's been things in upper limb, from Hokuman, Mayumo, in motion arm, U-grabber. So various things you can see. Again, these tend to be fairly small, penetration, fairly small studies right here. Again, I wouldn't say any of them are the standard, but it's encouraging to see these different areas. And certainly with walking devices as well. You have various systems to assist in gait, and I think that these do have a role in the rehabilitation the process right here. So one last thing and certainly I think video game based and virtual reality approaches will be players in rehab in the future. And I think the thing I like about this from the engineering side is it gives us quantitative data typically to evaluate these patients. Okay. All right, so let's talk a little bit about how we built our device. So I think this is a good set of steps if you have any sort of device that you're trying to build. For us again as an engineering group, the main thing is the clinical need. So first of all, what is the problem definition and what are we trying to solve? Then of course a collaborative team with both the technical and clinical people and maybe again the marketing people, the people from the tech transfer office. And then for us it's build a prototype. So we call this, we'll talk a little bit about this, but I think the term MVP, not most valuable player for you sports fans, but the minimal viable device is a good thing. So what the best thing is for us is to build something cheap and dirty as soon as we can. It gives us a common platform to talk with our clinical person and they may say, yeah, that's it, or no, that's not it at all, and kind of go back to the drawing board and iterate. So then feasibility test, first just to see will the patient tolerate, will it work, and then efficacy test to see if it's useful. So I think this is a reasonable framework. And then in terms of the team right here, both from the clinical side and the engineering side, you can really see the multidisciplinary nature where we have a lead physician who really says, this is overall direction, this is in keeping what I'm seeing at conferences, this is where clinical practice is going. Physical therapist. Do we have any PTs here today? Okay, yeah, PTs are my favorite. They're the ones who are actually working with the patients every day, and they have a wealth of knowledge as well. And clinical coordinator for us is important for scheduling, and then a person in human factors. So we do have someone who goes, interviews our parents and patients. From the engineering side, both mechanical engineers and software engineers working together to create the system. Okay, let's go on here. Okay, defining the goal right here. So, again, I think it's always good to begin in broad terms and then kind of iterate, but kind of get this into your, on paper as soon as possible. And then I think it's important to attend conferences maybe outside your original field, sometimes at least, to get an idea of what else is going on that you should be aware of. I think in addition to what we know, there's a lot of things we don't know. So these were all the questions we had. The clinicians, typically don't know what type of devices we can create. They see something online or something now with current technology, like, wow, that would be easy to adapt for rehabilitation, but maybe not so easy. How much it would cost, how we can vary it for patients. Engineers typically are pretty ignorant of the clinical environment. The age range, what levels they need, treatment time, and then of course the most important question, which you always have to pay attention, is how does it get funded? Is treatment covered by insurance? How someone will eventually pay for your device. Then you have to find some common language too as well, because engineers, we always like the pitch, roll, and yaw analogy. That's kind of the ship analogy. Clinicians, are going to be plantar flexion, dorsiflexion, inversion, eversion, adduction, so it's important to translate. And then again, for us, for engineer, active motion was when the machine was moving something. Passive was the machine is neutral, and that's the opposite of the therapist. So just some things to look out for there. All right, let me skip over a few of these here, and let's go on to the, see if I can see some of the devices here. Okay, so again, here was the minimal viable product. We talked about that right here. Okay, that was the ankle robot. Now let's see if this video will play. Okay, if I played it here, does it play? It doesn't look like it's playing on screen. Yeah, okay. So again, you can see this is where the device is physically moving her foot to eventually try to give her better range of motion. That's programmed by the therapist, but she is quite bored there too as well. Okay, let's go here. Okay, then we developed a better game with the video game version right here. So here we have a young man on the left, his foot there, which you can see at the bottom of the left screen. You see his foot is put in the device there with 3 degrees, and his foot is the pilot for an airplane video game. He is the red plane there, which he has to align with the other plane there, and then when he aligns it, it changes green, and then he can fly. Originally, we had kind of ellipses, but we found the rectangles work better. So the therapist program in here the motion. So, you know, they can make him move up, down, left, right, rotate the foot, and then they can have him work on various things. If he scores well, there's a little bit of a score that comes. He gets some bonus games, things like that. So typically for the lab version, they come to the lab, they do 20 sessions, so twice a week for 10 weeks, and then we evaluate some various outcome measures that I'll show you. For the home version right now, we take him to the home and we leave for 28 days. And the primary outcome is whether they use it for 21 of those days, and then secondary outcomes are range of motion. Again, we don't have a gait lab. I think that would be the gold standard. Hopefully, we're going to open a new sports medicine clinic next year and be able to check at a gait lab. But when the kids come up to our lab, which is where these are done, it's a lot of fun because the engineers come and the kids bring a lot of energy. They're excited to play. So far, they haven't seemed to gotten bored with the 20 sessions that they have. We think when we want to leave in the home for a longer time, we'll need to develop some new games. So that's the current version of the lab version here. Okay, let's go on here, right here. So these again is kind of the breakdown so far. 9 children so far, 30 minutes of games per session, twice a week for 10 weeks. And these are all the outcome measures. So from passive range of motion, active range of motion, strength. And these are all done by the physical therapist. So we can measure each time they come, but really what happens is they have an evaluation at the beginning and a post-evaluation, and I can show some of the results for that. So again, these were the inclusion criteria. So patients with CP on the gross motor functional classification level 1 to 3. So these were fairly ambulatory kids, so higher functioning kids as well. And then some of the exclusion criteria, which could include prior surgery or botulism injection close to the trial. Okay, so some of the results here. Okay. Let's go on here. So here's the age range. So fairly good age range. The youngest was 4. The oldest was 15. Mostly female. And then these are mostly GMFCS level 1 patients here. These are improvements in passive dorsiflexion. Okay, with the knee extension. So this is with the knee extended here using the PEDBOT. So on the left in the blue is before, and on the right is after. And in most cases, they have better dorsiflexion. You know, ultimately, of course, will this contribute to better gait? I think remains to be seen. And then changes in ankle strength right here. So these are all, for the most part, most people of the subjects so far tested improved their ankle strength. Okay. So early results look promising, but more study is warranted. Okay, as we said. Design refinement. Since then, we've worked on increasing the number of games. So they can play a Pong game, they can play a spaceship game. We have another little game where they can be a horse kind of walking down a pier and others. So I think that's what we need to do for the future. All right, let me go through a few more here about the home version as well. So after we started this trial in the lab, we said we really want to go to the home market because I think for the parents it's always very hard. We're in the middle of the city, hard for parents to get down to appointments. You know, we want to see if we leave this in the home, can we develop a system that kids will use? Can we get quantitative data? And then, of course, can we get reimbursed for telerehabilitation? You know, how would that be done and how would that be monitored by the therapist? So we did develop a lower cost device where this is shown right here. And we actually would use a cell phone to monitor the angles. Turns out a cell phone is reasonably accurate. We had this flow chart here where it would go through various steps. I'm going to use the engineering term of pitch, roll, and yaw and increase it. And so the software would be adaptive. So to me, the smarts would ultimately be in the software that could watch the kids, see how they would do, and then could adapt it. Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, I got a question. I was so excited too. All right, we'll save for questions for answer. Okay, right here. All right, nobody else stretched during the presentation. Okay. All right. Let's see. This is the home feasibility study. So fairly similar inclusion criteria. One thing that's not mentioned here is they need to have space in the home to set it up. Okay, so Canada is mostly metric now, right? Not the U.S. But anyway, in the U.S. it's a 2x4 piece of plywood is what we take. So about half the size of one of those tables, but they need to have a video monitor as well. So we've now done about 8 patients in the home trial. So here's a system here. It's just a little bit hard to see. And apparently when I play the video, it will turn on its side and be stretched. So be ready to move your head. We couldn't figure that out. That was part of the Halloween celebration with the ghost going through these devices here, that the gremlins got into it. But anyway, the goal is they have to do up to 30 minutes of play for 20 of the 28 days. There is a log they keep. Most of them have been honest about it, but we do audit the log, and one person did not play as much as they said in the log because the computer records everything, but we didn't feedback that to them, that, hey, we're watching you. The exercises are updated remotely each week, so we do have a server side where we can go in and see who has a home version, you know, and what they're doing. So let's see what it looks like if we play this video. It's going to be a little bit hard to see, but if you turn your head, you can kind of see the same idea. And it's just basically, you know, so again, the software is all the same, okay? So this has gone along pretty well right here in the feasibility study. Okay, let's see. So yeah, all right, so 67% of patients, 2/3 have demonstrated compliance right here, okay? And let's see if I've got some results for the homes version. Okay, yeah, so here's the percentage of use. So some very good. This was the one outlier who just didn't really use it. And so, you know, family selection is key. You know, most families want it. They're not paying for this right now, too, as well. So partially, you know, they see it as free therapy. But some of them maybe just, you know, just got busy during this time and didn't really use the system. Okay, and then let's see, also improvements right here. So I don't see here, you know, some improvements, but not necessarily overall right here. That's dorsiflexion. Strength looks pretty good right here. But, you know, again, the qualitative analysis, which we show here, so anecdotally, it was very good. You know, and whether, again, these are just parents and kids who want to believe or not, but, you know, one said that their daughter did ballet and she felt that she could move better after this. The daughter did rock climbing and felt that she could do better. You know, so for us, at least as researchers, that was great. Now, whether that would sustain a market and who would eventually pay for this device, I think remains to be seen. So. Okay, so let's see. So what were some of the qualitative analysis? You know, when you give someone exercises, they're generally not compliant. I think any of us who have been given exercises know that. But the machine actually kind of enforces the exercise. For one, it will enforce motion about different planes, and it will record things, and it is a video game. Now, again, in 30 days, they haven't gotten bored. I may go to a 90-day trial soon, so I may have to improve the games. What I would love is ultimately if they could dogfight against their friends. So they said instead of the parents having to nag someone to do the therapy, they'll be like, hey, Mom, can I go do my therapy now? You know, they would be sure, because we do think, again, this is therapy that ultimately for some of these kids, they'll need to do all throughout their life. So we then said, okay, what would be our minimal viable product for making a more robust version for the home? So these are some range of motion, roll plus or minus 25, yaw plus or minus 45, and pitch plus 30 to minus 70. Make it more adjustable. And we since had one of the engineers work with this building material called 8020. So literally 8020.net. These are kind of structural aluminum members that you can cut to any size. So it's not quite as glamorous as the other one, but it's very easy to assemble. So the foot would go in here, in the center of this device, and you would actually have a rotation about that axis, and about this axis. So 3 degrees of freedom, and you could scale this to different sizes, to the adult version. So I do have a colleague at George Washington University who we're going to try for adult rehab after ankle surgery. So if there's anybody in here who's interested in adult rehabilitation and for ankle surgery, and we can write a small grant to get a little money, of course, which everything runs on money right here, we would be very interested in that right here. So here's our physical therapist in the new version that's just been built. Was all made with plexiglass. We got a new laser cutter. So we had to use the laser cutter to cut out everything. So it's plexiglass and aluminum right here. And it works pretty well. Okay. All right, let's see here what else I have. Okay, so here's the clinical takeaways from all that. Increased ankle range of motion and strength were associated with increased number of sessions within the 28-day trial. PEDBOT Home has potential to mitigate some barriers to home exercise adherence. Greatest gains may actually be in convenience right here too. If it's convenient, they'll do their exercises, and again, it's quantitative right here. And of course, further studies are warranted. Okay, famous conclusion. And then lastly, from this point here too, we have the recap, okay? You know, working with clinicians, my takeaways are very clear definition of what you want to solve, because you do speak different languages. You know, interdisciplinary communication, minimal viable product in patients. You know, this has evolved over a couple years. It always takes longer than you think right here. So with that, I think, Babek, it is 12:55. I have some other slides, but maybe we're running out of time, right? With 1 o'clock, and we should take questions, or should I run through a few other things real quick?
It's up to you. What do people think? 4 slides or
questions? All right.
Maybe 5 minutes?
Okay, let me do 5 minutes, and I'll do a real recap, quick recap of our institute then too. Okay. Oh yeah, we gotta play this. It's too bad that this is a little distorted, but it's a young lady who just got her high score on the whole year. So she was very excited. So that part definitely makes your day. You know, I'm sure for you guys working in rehab, you know, it's gratifying to see the patients, and for us, it's always gratifying to see the kids. So acknowledgements. So next steps in this area, we are looking at adding EMG. Could you look at this in muscle activity, and could you look at adding FES, so some functional electrical stimulation to fire the muscles? So that's one thing we may look at. All right, real quick on the hippotherapy, we talked about that. Anybody who knows hippotherapy, it's therapeutic horseback riding, typically also used with autistic kids, but also can be used to strengthen core muscles on some kids with cerebral palsy, the motion of the horse. So we did build a hippotherapy simulator, which is a 6 degree of freedom motion platform, a carousel horse, and then a tracking system to track the back as well. And we have put this into trial too with some kids at our hospital. So here are the kids on the horse. Again, this is the pier where the horse walks down, other horses come at them. We track the back. There aren't a safety harness again with the IRB rules, but these are the little tracking markers, the dots on the back. They have to lean left and right as other horses come at them, and they get a score. One child thought he should get points when he hit the other horses, so we changed the game for him as well. But that's been a little bit stalled because in terms of reimbursement and portability, it's not quite as attractive. Although it's again a great showcase when people come by, you know, as well. I'll talk a little bit about what we do at the hospital and then wrap up. So in the area of navigation and image guidance, we work in flexible endoscopy, augmented reality, and also quantitative imaging. I think you're familiar with endoscopy. It's a way of looking inside the body non-invasively here, typically done by hand, but we have done some work with building a little power mechanism, a robotic device. Once you get to the area of interest, if you get up into the kidney and you want a power drive, you can snap it into this device. This is some electromagnetic tracking. You can track your instruments as well. We have worked with augmented reality, my colleague here, in looking at the visualization in surgery. So in this case, fusion of laparoscopic video and ultrasound into one image. If you're doing tumor surgery, so you know what's under the hood. This is actually in clinical trial at the hospital as well. So this has been tested. And then finally, my colleague does quantitative imaging. Marius Lingaru does a lot of that. Pediatrics, we have a wide size variation as well. And they do a number of studies with statistical shape models, other things like that. How do you determine what's normal? Also some screening for genetic syndromes using symmetry of facial analysis of newborns as well. So that's really the wrap up. A few future of surgery and minimally invasive interventions. I think that's really for research groups like ours, working with clinicians, but no doubt will involve technology. So, you know, I think you need your training and you need the technology, and it's kind of fun to be a part of it as well. These are my acknowledgements from some colleagues. And then if you have time to come to Washington, D.C., we're the spaceship-looking building about 2 miles north of the Capitol, and you're welcome to visit anytime. So with that, let me wrap up, and thanks for your attention. So I guess we have time for a question or two, and apparently there's some people online. I don't know if they can ask questions that way as well.
Time for 1 or 2 quick questions.
Okay.
So you, in that device for the rehabilitation of
Yep.
the ankle surgery, I think, I'm not sure that I understand clearly, but the device has some sort of motorized functionality
Right.
in order to provide negative pressure into the ankle.
Yeah. Yeah, so the question was about the device and providing negative pressure or resistance, but yeah, it is motorized, so one is twofold. One is if the person can't quite make the motion, you can provide them what we call an active compensation mode. So like power steering, you can help them pull through the motion. Or if you want to stretch them a little bit, maybe 1%, then once they get flexibility, then they want to work on strength. So then you can actually use it to provide resistance mode in a stiffer spring. So in software, we watch as they try to make the goals, and if they're not quite making it in time, we can then give them a little boost right there as well. So I think that's the difference is we looked at making some more low-cost devices that were purely passive device, no motors, but I think the motors in there and the ability to provide resistance as assistance is needed, and the algorithms there is really, really the value add of the device. So my colleague at the adult hospital says, I would love to do this and compare it to adults training after ankle surgery, rehabbing with traditional methods and rehabbing with your device. So that's what we're going to try to start with that. Question online, okay.
From Aaron Yurkwich. Thank you for your talk. I was wondering what is the reason for creating your own games instead of interfacing with popular commercial games?
Yeah. So the question is, why did we build our own games instead of interfacing with popular? Well, for one thing, we did look originally, could we just use it as a controller for the Nintendo Wii or other devices as well? And it's not quite so easy to get into those games. And there were specific things that the therapist wanted us to do to really create a turnkey system. So we really did it so we could kind of eventually envision marketing a device which has our games, also allow you to enter patient data, have a server side where you could track all things. So the software is an important part. But we would also love it if maybe the device could be a foot controller for Nintendo Wii or other devices as well, so they could play video games. So that's something down the line. So that's a great question.
How early and if or do you involve patients? We're under all the time when we're dealing with the elderly, which most of our rehab focuses on. We should involve them early in any study. Will it be cost effective? Will they accept it? But with kids, it's a little different. Or do you just make assumptions and say, "Here's a game, you'll love it"?
Yeah. So the question was about how early to involve the kids, and at the hospital, they're big nowadays on promise measures, patient-reported outcome measures. So, always involve the patient. Even now when you go to our IRB, they want to know how you're involving the patient sometimes in your study. So with kids, we did do it from the beginning because the beauty of being in the hospital is we have the kids there. Yeah. And the therapists know these kids pretty well because they work with them on a long-term basis. So early on, when we were developing it, we would just have the therapist bring the kids up after their regular session. And even with our IRB, if we're just trying something again, we're not violating, we're not doing a study, so that's permitted. I mean, you always have to be careful as a researcher because we know, that the rules are very strict, about approved studies and that. But at least within our hospital, as long as you're not putting the kid at risk, right here too as well, we do try some things. And that was a big deal of the home version as well, is to get the feedback, and why we added a human factors person to the team who literally goes to the home and interviews the parents and kids before and after. Yeah. So I think it's key, and I think again that's part of the iterative development approach. A lot of the tweaks to the games and things, again, even the small ones like having the horse get points when it took out other horses instead of went around, could be done from the kids. So I think if you want to do this long term, and maybe even in response to the software question, you need to be able to personalize things as well for each child's experience. So, good question.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much.